It wasn't my first time at one of Melissa's high school reunions. We'd been to her 5-year gathering just a few summers ago, and it had been nothing special, a bunch of old friends awkwardly standing around trying to pretend they cared about each other's lives. I mostly remember nursing a cheap beer while pretending to listen to stories about who was divorced, who had moved out of town, and who was still trying to cling to their high school glory days. This time, though, something felt different. Maybe it was the way Melissa had been acting all week. Normally, she wasn't one to fuss over events like this, but she'd spent days picking out her dress, trying on different outfits in front of the mirror and asking my opinion, which she usually never did. That tight black dress she'd settled on? Yeah, I hadn't been able to take my eyes off her. Not just me, either. When we walked into the dimly lit hall of the local event center, I saw the way the other guys stared at her, like they were seeing her for the first time in 10 years, a grown woman with curves that weren't there in high school. She looked amazing, and I could tell she knew it. But what really caught me off guard was the way she kept checking her phone all evening. It wasn't like Melissa. She'd never been one to be glued to her screen, especially not when we were out together. And whenever I asked who she was texting, she'd just smile, brush it off, and say something like, "Oh, just the girls from high school, making sure everyone knows where we're meeting up." Fine, I thought. Maybe she was just excited to see her old friends. No big deal. But there was something else. We hadn't been there more than an hour before I noticed him. The ex-boyfriend. I'd heard about him before, Jason, the guy she dated for most of senior year before they broke up right before graduation. Apparently, it had been serious enough that Melissa used to joke about how she'd almost followed him to college. And here he was, standing across the room with a drink in hand, glancing at her when he thought I wasn't looking. I'm not the jealous type. Or at least, I didn't think I was. But when Melissa excused herself to go find the girls, something in the pit of my stomach told me to follow her. Maybe it was the way she smiled a little too brightly when she passed Jason, or the way he subtly glanced at her as she walked by. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I waited a few seconds before casually slipping out of the main room, scanning the crowd for any sign of her. The hallway was dimly lit, just enough light to make out faces as couples and groups passed by, heading to the restrooms or stepping outside for a smoke. But no Melissa. A few steps further down the corridor, I heard muffled voices coming from around the corner. Quiet but familiar. My pulse quickened. I stayed close to the wall, careful not to make a sound as I crept toward the voices. Then I heard it. A low laugh. Melissa's laugh. And Jason's voice, quiet and teasing. Something about how good she looked tonight. How it was like old times. I could feel my blood pounding in my ears, but I forced myself to stay calm, to listen. I edged closer, heart racing now, my mind trying to catch up with what my instincts already knew. Then I saw them. Around the corner, in one of the small side rooms meant for storage or coat checks, there they were, Melissa and Jason, standing a little too close, her back against the wall, his hand resting on the curve of her waist as they talked in low tones. At that moment, time seemed to slow down. I should have stormed in, should have said something, but I didn't. Instead, I stood there, frozen, watching as Melissa leaned in slightly, her fingers brushing Jason's arm. I took a step back, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but my mind was already moving 10 steps ahead. I could cause a scene, make a big deal out of it right then and there. But no. Something held me back. There was a bigger plan forming in my mind. A much bigger plan. I don't know how long I stood there in that hallway, staring at the two of them. It could have been seconds, maybe a minute, but it felt like an eternity. Melissa hadn't kissed him, not yet, anyway. But the way they were standing, the way her body was angled towards him, it was like I could feel the heat between them from where I stood. I should have been angry. Furious, even. And I was, somewhere deep down. But in that moment, all I felt was this strange, cold calm, like my brain had clicked into survival mode. Fight or flight. Except I wasn't going to fight. Not yet. I stepped back, slowly, making sure not to draw any attention to myself. I wasn't ready for them to know I'd seen anything. Not yet. There was something far more satisfying about watching this play out on my terms. About making them think they were getting away with it. As I made my way back into the main room, the noise of the reunion washed over me, laughter, music, the clinking of glasses. It was surreal, like stepping into a different world after what I'd just witnessed. No one had any idea what was happening just a few rooms away. Everyone was lost in their own nostalgic bubbles, catching up on lost time. I scanned the room for familiar faces, trying to get my bearings, when I spotted her. Emily. Emily used to be Melissa's best friend in high school. I'd heard plenty of stories about her over the years, how they used to be inseparable back in the day. But somewhere along the way, they had drifted apart, as people do. Melissa hadn't mentioned her in ages, but I recognized her immediately, standing by the bar with a glass of wine, laughing with a group of old classmates. Something clicked in my mind. It was risky, sure. But if there was anyone who might be able to help me turn the tables on Melissa, it was Emily. She had been there back when Melissa and Jason were a thing. She'd know the history, the dynamics. And from what little Melissa had told me about their falling out, Emily probably wasn't Melissa's biggest fan these days. I took a deep breath, then made my way over to the bar. Emily caught sight of me before I reached her, her smile widening in recognition. "Hey, aren't you Melissa's husband?" she asked, raising her glass in a casual salute. "Yeah," I replied, managing a smile. "I'm Matt. I think we met at the last reunion?" Right, she nodded, her eyes flickering with interest. "How's it going? Melissa around?" I glanced towards the hallway, forcing myself to keep my expression neutral. "She's catching up with some old friends. You know how it is." Emily raised an eyebrow, sensing something in my tone. She was sharp, I'd give her that. I ordered a drink, trying to think of the best way to approach this without coming off as desperate or paranoid. Emily didn't strike me as someone who'd shy away from gossip, but I needed her on my side, not just as a casual bystander. "You and Melissa used to be close, right?" I asked, keeping my voice light. Emily laughed, taking a sip of her wine. "We were practically attached at the hip in high school." "Why, what's she been saying about me?" I shook my head, smiling slightly. "Nothing bad. I don't know, you two don't seem as close these days." I figured there was a story there. Emily's expression shifted, just a flicker, but enough to let me know I'd hit a nerve. She set her glass down, leaning in slightly. "Oh, there's a story all right. But I'm guessing that's not why you came over here." I hesitated, then decided to go for it. What did I have to lose at this point? "Listen," I said, lowering my voice. "There's something going on with Melissa tonight. I don't know how to explain it, but she's acting weird. Like, really weird." Emily raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Weird how?" I glanced around, making sure no one else was paying attention. I saw her with Jason. Her face twisted into a knowing smirk. "Oh, Jason. Of course. Some things never change, huh?" I nodded. "Exactly. I don't want to overreact, but I think they're up to something. I'm not looking to make a scene or anything, but I also don't want to just sit here and pretend nothing's happening." Emily's eyes gleamed with something I couldn't quite place. "Well, that's interesting. I didn't think she'd be dumb enough to actually go back to him, but..." She trailed off, clearly thinking. "You're not planning to confront them, are you?" "Not yet," I admitted. "But I can't just let it slide. I need to do something, and I could use some help." There was a pause as Emily considered my words, her eyes narrowing slightly. Then, slowly, a smile crept across her face, the kind of smile that told me she had her own reasons for wanting to get involved. "All right," she said finally, leaning in even closer. "You've got my attention. What's the plan?" Emily's smile told me she wasn't just in this for me, she had her own score to settle. Whatever had gone down between her and Melissa back in high school must have been more than a simple falling out. But I didn't care. All I needed was for her to be on my side, and it looked like I had her. "First things first," Emily said, swirling the wine in her glass like she was deep in thought. "If you want this to work, you can't confront them tonight. You have to be smart about it, play the long game. Make them think they're getting away with it." I nodded, feeling the tension in my chest ease a little. That had been my instinct too, to wait, to make sure whatever revenge I was planning would actually hit where it hurt. Causing a scene now would only make me look like the fool. "So what do you suggest?" I asked. Emily took a sip of her wine, her eyes sharp as she thought it over. "I know Jason. He's cocky, thinks he can have anyone he wants, especially girls from his past. He'll push Melissa, see how far he can go. If they haven't already done something tonight, they will soon." Her confidence in that made my stomach churn, but I kept my face neutral. "So I wait for them to cross the line?" "Exactly," Emily said. "You wait. And when they do, you don't explode. You don't even flinch. You make them believe you never suspected a thing. And then?" "And then you play your card," she said, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. "You hit them both where it hurts. Jason's got nothing to lose, really, he's single, doesn't give a damn about what people think. But Melissa? Her reputation matters. Her image matters. I leaned in closer, intrigued. What do you mean? She's always been about appearances, Emily said with a smirk. The perfect wife, the one who got out of her small town and made something of herself. She's got a nice house, a solid job, She wouldn't risk all that unless she thought she could get away with it. It stung hearing her lay it out like that, but she was right. Melissa had always cared about how people saw her, especially when it came to the perfect marriage. She'd spent years building this image of herself, and I knew that was something I could use against her. But how do we make sure it hits her hard enough? I asked, a bitter edge creeping into my voice. I'm not interested in just catching her. I want to make sure she feels it. Emily's smile widened. That's where I come in. She glanced around, making sure no one was listening, then lowered her voice even more. Melissa and we used to share everything. I know more about her than you might think. Her secrets. Her weak spots. All the stuff she doesn't want anyone knowing, especially not her husband. A chill ran down my spine. I hadn't expected this. Whatever history these two shared, it wasn't just high school drama. Emily knew things, and it was becoming clear that her involvement could take this to another level. What kind of secrets are we talking about? I asked cautiously. Emily leaned in so close I could smell the faint scent of her perfume. Let's just say. There are things from Melissa's past that would ruin her if they came out now. Things she's worked very hard to keep buried. The way Emily said it made it clear she wasn't bluffing. She had dirt, real dirt, and the thought of using it sent a twisted sense of satisfaction through me. Melissa had been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back. If I could bring her whole world crashing down, maybe that would make this hurt a little less. Okay, I said finally. I'm in. But I don't just want to ruin her reputation. I want her to feel the same kind of betrayal she's making me feel right now. Emily's smile turned wicked. I think I know exactly how to do that. She paused for a moment, as if savoring the plan taking shape in her mind. Then she laid it out. Here's what we do, she said, leaning in even closer. We let Melissa think she's gotten away with it. We play nice, act like everything's normal. Then, when she least expects it, we drop the bomb. Not just the cheating, we take it one step further. I stared at her, waiting for the next part of the plan. Emily's eyes gleamed with excitement. You get close to someone she cares about, Emily said, her voice barely a whisper now. Someone she wouldn't suspect. Someone who can hurt her just as much as Jason is hurting you. It took a second for the realization to sink in. You mean? You? Emily nodded, her smile widening. I mean me. We make her think she's safe, and then we turn the tables. I've got history with Melissa. If she finds out that her ex-best friend and her husband have been plotting behind her back, it'll destroy her. The thought of it, the idea that I could flip the script, make Melissa feel the same kind of sickening betrayal she was inflicting on me, was tempting. More than tempting. It was perfect. But how do we pull it off? I asked, trying to stay rational despite the adrenaline now rushing through my veins. She'll be suspicious if we suddenly start hanging out. Leave that to me, Emily said, finishing her drink. We don't have to make it look obvious. Just a few well-timed encounters, enough to make her second-guess everything she thought she knew. We'll make her paranoid before she even knows what's happening. I felt a strange mix of emotions welling up inside me, anger, excitement, even a little fear. This wasn't just some petty revenge anymore. This was a real plan, and it was about to get messy. But if Melissa thought she could cheat on me with her ex and walk away unscathed, she was dead wrong. All right, I said, my voice steady. Let's do this. Emily smiled, lifting her glass in a mock toast. To revenge. I clinked my glass against hers, knowing full well that there was no turning back now. For the next few weeks, I played the part of the unsuspecting husband perfectly. I kept things normal at home, dinners together, Netflix on the couch, weekend errands, all the usual stuff. Melissa never once suspected that I knew what she was doing behind my back. If anything, she seemed happier, almost more relaxed around me. It made me sick, honestly, but I played along, forcing myself to stay calm and keep my eyes on the bigger plan. Emily and I had agreed that the key was timing. I couldn't rush into it. If I pushed too soon, Melissa might catch on, and we'd lose our advantage. Emily had started casually connecting with Melissa, dropping by our house a couple of times, pretending it was all part of some nostalgia-fueled desire to rebuild old friendships. Melissa, to my surprise, seemed open to it, probably because she had no idea what was really going on. The first time Emily came over, they sat in the living room laughing about old high school stories, reminiscing about the dumb stuff they used to do. I stayed out of the way, playing the perfect husband in the background. They even made plans for a girls' night out, just like old times. I wasn't stupid, though. I knew Melissa was still seeing Jason. She was careful about it, but there were little signs. She'd make excuses to go out alone, telling me she was meeting a friend for coffee or staying late at work, and then come home with that same guilty but smiling look. I wasn't following her every move, but I didn't need to. Emily had a way of finding out where Jason was, and whenever Melissa had a mysterious errand, it just so happened that Jason was in town. It was almost laughable how cliché it all was. But the real turning point came during one of those so-called girls' nights. Emily and Melissa had gone out to a bar downtown, some trendy spot Melissa used to love back in the day. I had stayed home, pretending to be the trusting husband, while Emily kept me in the loop with quick, subtle texts. Emily, we're having drinks. She's definitely tipsy. Me, good. Anything? Emily, not yet. But she's talking about Jason. She's slipping. I've been waiting for that, for Melissa to get comfortable enough to let something slip. I had to bite my tongue every time Emily texted me an update, the adrenaline building in my chest as I imagined them sitting there, Melissa rambling on about how Jason had changed or how they were just catching up. It was sickening, but it was exactly what we needed. And then, finally, the breakthrough came. Emily, she just admitted it. She and Jason have been hooking up. I stared at the message for a few seconds, the words sinking in. Even though I already knew what was happening, seeing it spelled out like that, in black and white, hit me harder than I expected. But instead of feeling rage, I felt nothing. Just cold, calm determination. Me, did she say where? Emily, some hotel out of town. I'll get the details. I'm going to push her for more. Me, good. Keep her talking. I put my phone down and stared at the TV for a while, though I wasn't really watching. Melissa had come home late before, tipsy from these little outings, but now I knew for sure what she was doing. She hadn't just crossed a line, she'd obliterated it. When she got home that night, I played the part perfectly again. She was buzzed but not drunk, stumbling through the door with a smile on her face, her hair a little messy from whatever bar they'd been at. I asked how the night was, feigned interest in her stories, and kissed her on the cheek as she headed upstairs for bed. All the while, the knowledge of what she'd confessed to Emily was buzzing in the back of my mind, pushing me further into my plan. The next few days were crucial. Emily kept up her role, and we carefully orchestrated our next move. Melissa had no idea what was coming, and that was exactly how we wanted it. Then came the day of reckoning. Melissa had another meetup planned with Jason. I knew about it because Emily had gotten her to spill all the details during one of their chats. This time, it was in the city, at a hotel they'd used before. I'd be damned if I let her sneak off again without making her pay for it. But instead of confronting her, I had something more devious in mind. Emily and I were set to meet that same afternoon. We hadn't told Melissa, of course. She thought I was working late, and that Emily had her own plans. But while Melissa was off doing God knows what with Jason, Emily and I were going to get even closer. Emily was waiting for me at a coffee shop just a block away from the hotel where Melissa and Jason were meeting. I walked in, spotting her immediately. She was wearing this tight dress that, frankly, left little to the imagination. It was perfect. If anyone happened to see us together, it would look exactly like what we wanted it to look like. And in a place like this, it wasn't too far-fetched that word might get back to Melissa. I sat down across from her, my heart pounding a little harder than I'd expected. This was the moment everything was about to change. "You ready for this?" Emily asked, leaning in slightly, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "More than ready," I said, glancing towards the hotel out the window. "She thinks she's getting away with it." Emily smiled, that same wicked smile she'd had the night we made the plan. "Not for much longer." We talked for a while, making sure the timing was just right. Then, when we knew Melissa would be with Jason, Emily and I walked out of the coffee shop, making our way toward the hotel. As we approached, a sudden thought hit me: what if this didn't go as planned? What if Melissa caught us, but it backfired somehow? But I shook it off. There was no turning back now. Emily looped her arm through mine as we stepped into the lobby, just enough to make it look intimate. If anyone from the reunion crowd saw us here, it would raise eyebrows. We weren't just playing a game anymore, we were rewriting the rules. And Melissa had no idea what was about to hit her. I stood outside the hotel room door, my heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. Emily was right beside me, playing her part perfectly, her hand still lightly resting on my arm as if we were just a couple out for the evening. But inside, Everything was about to change. The moment I stepped through that door, there would be no going back. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I wasn't here to fight or confront, I was here to observe, to let the reality of what was happening sink in. Melissa had crossed the line long ago, and now it was my turn. Emily shot me a look. "You ready for this?" I nodded, my jaw clenched. "Let's do it." We didn't knock. That would have given them a chance to hide, to act like nothing was happening. No, this had to be raw, unfiltered. I reached for the door handle, grateful that Emily had gotten the room number from Melissa in one of their late-night talks. It clicked open, and I pushed the door wide, stepping into the room without hesitation. The sight that greeted me was everything I had expected, but that didn't make it any less gut-wrenching. There they were, Melissa and Jason. Jason was sitting on the edge of the bed, his shirt half unbuttoned, looking smug and overly comfortable in the moment. Melissa was standing in front of him, her back to the door, wearing a dress that was far too short for the occasion, one that I hadn't seen her wear before. The kind of dress you don't wear to a casual catch-up. Her hands were resting lightly on Jason's shoulders, and though they hadn't heard me yet, the energy in the room was undeniable. They were close. Too close. It was one of those moments where time seemed to slow down. Melissa turned, probably sensing something behind her, and the look on her face when she saw me standing there was priceless. It was a mix of shock, guilt, and panic, all rolled into one. Jason, on the other hand, just smirked, as if daring me to react. "Matt?" Melissa's voice was a broken whisper, her eyes wide as she took a step back from Jason. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The silence spoke volumes. Jason leaned back, stretching his arms out behind him, completely unbothered. "Well, this is awkward," he said with that cocky grin that made my skin crawl. He didn't care. He'd never cared. For him, this was just a game. But this wasn't about Jason anymore. This was about Melissa. I let the silence stretch a little longer, watching her squirm. She was trying to find the words, trying to explain away the situation, but nothing she could say would change what I'd seen. The air between us felt thick with unspoken betrayal, the weight of it pressing down on all of us. "You didn't expect this, did you?" I finally said, my voice calm, almost cold. "You didn't think I'd find out?" Melissa opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Her face flushed with guilt, her hands trembling slightly as she took another step back. "Matt. I raised a hand to cut her off. "Save it. I don't need to hear whatever excuse you've got. I've seen enough." Jason stood up, that infuriating grin still plastered on his face. "Look, man, it's not what it looks like." I turned to him, my eyes hard. "You really think I'm that stupid?" He shrugged, unfazed. "Just saying, there's no need to get all worked up. It's not like you weren't expecting this, right?" That was it. His nonchalance, his complete disregard for the damage he'd done, hit a nerve. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us in an instant, and for a moment, I thought about hitting him. But I didn't. He wasn't worth it. Instead, I glanced at Melissa one last time, taking in the full weight of her betrayal. "I hope it was worth it," I said, my voice low but firm. "Because you just destroyed everything." Before she could respond, I turned on my heel and walked out, leaving her standing there in that hotel room with Jason, the man she'd thought was worth risking it all for. Emily was waiting for me in the hallway, her face unreadable. "How did it go?" she asked quietly. "It's done," I said, my voice hollow. "She knows." For a moment, Emily and I just stood there, the reality of what had just happened settling over us. But this wasn't over yet. This was just the beginning. "You still want to go through with the rest?" Emily asked, her tone careful. I nodded, a cold smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "Absolutely." The next few days were a blur. Melissa tried to reach out, of course, phone calls, texts, even a couple of desperate voicemails, but I ignored all of it. I wasn't interested in her explanations or apologies. The time for that had passed. Instead, I focused on the next phase of the plan. Emily and I kept up appearances, getting closer, making sure word got out. It wasn't hard. We made sure to be seen together, casual at first, then more intimate as time went on. It didn't take long for the rumors to start. Melissa might have been good at hiding her affair, but once the tables turned, she had no idea how to handle it. Seeing her face around town, knowing she'd heard about Emily and me, it was the sweetest kind of revenge. She didn't know whether to be angry, jealous, or heartbroken, and it was clear she was spiraling. But the real satisfaction came when Emily and I decided to make it official. Nothing too dramatic, Just a simple post on social media, a photo of the two of us having dinner, smiling, happy. The kind of photo Melissa would see and immediately know what it meant. The fallout was immediate. Melissa's carefully crafted world began to crumble. She showed up at the house one night, begging me to talk to her, tears streaming down her face as she pleaded for forgiveness. But it was too late. She'd made her choice when she started sneaking around with Jason. Now, she had to live with it. "I loved you," she sobbed, standing on the porch as I kept the door half closed, making sure she couldn't step inside. "I made a mistake, but I love you, Matt. Please, we can fix this." I shook my head, my expression cold and unyielding. "No, Melissa. You don't get to play the victim now. You chose this. And now you have to live with the consequences." She stared at me, her eyes wide with shock, as if she couldn't believe I was walking away from her. But I was. And I wasn't looking back. As I closed the door, shutting her out of my life for good, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. The pain was still there, but it was distant now, dulled by the knowledge that I'd won. Melissa had thought she could have it all, her ex, her secret life, and her perfect marriage. But in the end, she was the one left standing alone, while I walked away with my head held high. What would you do if your partner rekindled an old flame? Would you walk away or plan something bigger?